From the moment there was a spoken word, man declared war against his mother, nature, tearing down her forests, uprooting her gardens and ripping mountains and stone from the earth in an attempt to make her in his image. And now that he has conquered nature, his hubris declares war against his father, the spirit, all in the name of progress, a mistress who cares for no one except for the one married to her last. And many men have conjoined themselves with such a mistress. He constructs abominations to pacify himself, to reduce himself to the state of an infant with drugs like opium and hashish. And now that he has conquered his father, he sets his aims on himself. Man creates cradles of stability to protect himself from his mother's whims. Through his understanding of continuity, he's able to develop a sense of permanence in relation to his environment. This is the will of man, to maintain the continuity, or rather the establishment of boundaries. This is that I am me, he is him, and that animal is different from me. Because of this, he can create structures throughout time. But man betrays himself when he indulges in instant gratification, and this is why it is seen as the ultimate vice, because it contradicts the very foundation upon which man realizes his will to power, to dominance over nature, which is chaotic. And man cannot thrive in nature. His body is weak, easily cut and torn, slower and less dexterous. How does this idea of continuity come about? By external interaction with other humans. Through other humans, we come to understand that our actions ripple throughout time with the world as its medium, and we only begin to realize this when we operate with others in mind. So I reject individualism as the greatest good with every fibre of my being. I believe there is an objective morality, but rationality has suppressed it. I ask myself, what is an emotion? A push or pull towards an object? You ask yourself, is this good for me? But in humans, there is an inherent erosion of boundaries between themselves. We are our group, and they are their group. We are our beliefs, and we are what we do, and they are what they do. And so we ask ourselves, what is good for us? Secondly, looking at it like this, the emotional component is often labelled as subjective, but it is in fact a product of the pressure of natural selection, a very real phenomenon. Emotions are instinctual attractions and repulsions with subcategories: love, hate, avarice, humility, the list goes on. While the emotional component may very well be subjective, the realm that precedes it, where everything must answer to functionality as the arbiter, is by its very definition objective. It is removed, detached, and impartial through its unfairness. And in this sense, instinct is subject to nature, and nature is objective. All life has a desire to reproduce and to facilitate goodness for itself, and emotions arise from this drive, through nature, as a mechanism of refinement. If there is no push and pull, no attraction, the mind is not willed to move the body, and an inert body is a dead one. As I began to question the world more and more, I eventually stumbled upon what I believe to be a primordial blight in the human mind. I won't be the first to say similar things, and I certainly won't be the last. However, the answer I arrived at when I was 16 going on 17 drove me into psychosis. This blight is not narcissism, nihilism, or even the broader mental health crisis. They are merely symptoms of a deeper issue. In my eyes, this deeper issue lies in the very principle upon which our society was founded: merit. My friend Elohim once told me, first principles are everything. If our first principle is merit, what does that look like when we construct a castle or a monument upon that foundation? Meritocracy, a system of government or the holding of power by individuals selected based on their ability. On the surface, this sounds fair, even admirable. Yet, to me, what this principle ultimately boils down to is the act of measuring individuals by things that are secondary to themselves, proxies you could call them. This approach has undoubtedly served us well as a collective, but I believe it has neglected the individual. If our entire paradigm is structured to see people and even ourselves through the proxy of the output they can produce, can we ever truly capture the essence of a person? Can we ever truly see the soul? We are not measuring each other or ourselves by our character, our virtue, our honour, or our integrity, virtues that bridge the gap between the objective experiences we all share and the individual's subjective experiences. Instead, we have abandoned the pursuit of moral standards, and we have suffered because of it. Why do we need moral standards? The answer may surprise some. It's not about defining an objective good or bad. Instead, it's about establishing something akin to, no matter what this is, I am. This is who we are. If you grew up in the era of postmodernity like me, you may feel like this doesn't make sense. That's because postmodernity has it backwards. Humans can perceive the objective world more accurately than any other creature on the planet. This is demonstrated by the extent and depth to which we can interact with and change it. In my eyes, humans don't struggle with this at all. We are capable of producing inputs and using propositional logic to generate accurate outputs. If you graduated high school, I have no doubt you can do this. Given our inherently social nature, I think humans truly struggle in navigating the subjective experience. This struggle is evident in the countless philosophers and thought leaders who have wrestled with questions like, who am I? What am I doing here? What is the meaning of life? Unlike our objective capabilities, these subjective inquiries have yielded no axioms, no absolute truths. Because humans cannot do this, we develop social adaptations to facilitate this process. And it was God who was derivative of a social contract, or perhaps the social contract was derivative of God, but that's another conversation for another day. Humans outsourced their identity to monuments of beauty, and what was beautiful was the epitome of their moral paradigm. This is what Nietzsche means when he says God is dead and we killed him. How do we know this? Or better yet, how do I know? Just look at the archetypes or monuments we construct and worship. In the modern era, our heroes are no longer something to behold above us, reflecting what we could aspire to be. Instead, they are something to relate to, designed to make us comfortable. The human spirit wanted to free itself from God, but in doing so it trapped itself in endless inquiries about its own nature. It began to exhibit the same behaviour as its ancestors, building archetypes to fill the void. But unlike those of our ancestors, today's archetypes do not seek to inspire or uplift, they seek only to relate. The mental health of the individual is important because the cumulative health of all individuals affects the group's mental health. In turn, the group's mental health affects the individuals that make up the group. It's hard to say where one starts and the other begins because we must look so far back in time to ascertain that. As I understand it, forming connections with others around social structures with varying degrees of complexity has been a part of mankind's development as a species. This is arguably the main contributor to why we are here today. Therefore, it can be inferred that the integrity of the psyche of the group, and by extension, the individual, or the psyche of the individual, and by extension the group, is vital if we are to progress as a species. Right now, we are experiencing a mental health crisis in America. According to a 2022 survey of 1,055 Gen Z adults, 42% have a diagnosed mental health condition, and more than a quarter of those were diagnosed during the COVID-19 pandemic or later. In addition, 1 in 3 18 to 24-year-olds now report symptoms of depression or anxiety disorder, compared with 1 in 4 in 2000. I don't know what is causing this, but I have an idea. The first thing that popped into my mind was to correlate mental health issues with the urbanization or industrialization of an area. However, thankfully, the work had already been done. According to the Centre of Urban Design for Mental Health, people in urban areas compared to rural areas are 40% more at risk of developing depression, and their chances of developing schizophrenia are doubled. They are also 20% more at risk of anxiety. If this is the case, we can assume that urbanization is detrimental to the mental health of the individual, and by extension the group. If this is the case, and this is a cause and not a correlation, then I have an idea. Now I know some people may be tired of hearing this man's name, but I have to mention him as my entire argument or proposition is hinged on one of his lectures. His name is Jordan Peterson. In his lecture, he says that the mental health of an individual is derived from the group. He says they used to think it was an internal mechanism, but they learned it was not. Based on this, my mind took a leap of faith and concluded that if people's mental health is tied to the group, and that is the only way they can gauge their sanity, what happens when you can't see the effect your actions are having on the people or the community you live in? What happens when there are so many groups with different values that nobody knows what hierarchy of values to judge themselves by? I think we end up with half of a generation dealing with mental health issues. The next idea ties religion into this. Religion was the only way ancient societies could manage such large populations, when the fastest speed authority figures in different duchies or even cities could communicate with each other was the speed of a horse. This was a problem. It is this gap between the action and the reward or punishment that leads people to even contemplate going against the will that the central authority figure propagates. But a person's conscious thoughts are always with them wherever they go, regardless of how far they travel. People may argue that modern society has a sense of right and wrong. I take Nietzsche's stance on this. The only reason those people have these inherent feelings of right and wrong is because of the will of Jesus and God living on, even in the minds of people who no longer consciously believe. This only serves as a testament to the will of God and how powerful it is in maintaining order in a society that has abandoned him. Bringing these ideas together, religion provides an objective value system for the individuals within the group or society to orient their subjective experiences around, thus grounding everyone in a shared reality or perception of reality. If everyone is operating off of the same framework, and religion does plant the seeds for this faith or rather shared beliefs that hold our fellow man to a higher standard than he is predisposed to keep himself to, it could be crucial to maintaining the stability of a nation or even simply a small group. I'm not arguing for the existence of God, but for the importance of faith in established institutions. If I were to sum this up once more, it would be that a shared belief system for people to see themselves through is integral to developing one's identity and self-concept, which is crucial for one's mental state or sanity. Religion provided this for centuries, and so, with the conquering of nature through his permanent structures and the dismantling of his spirit, as a symptom of said permanence, it seems we are put into a position where we can't win. My question is, why would nature do this? And I think that this is universal across mammals, at the very least as demonstrated with the rat utopia experiment. It ultimately ended in the God, the divine, the masculine, represents all static things. The devil, the feminine, represents dynamism and movement. Time, which measures movement, is the only way we can realize what is static. A lack gives rise to movement. This is seen in the universe itself. If you take water out of a cup, the rest of the water fills the void, a nothingness. This void gives rise to movement and is the only way we can realize something is there. The static, the masculine, is realized through the feminine. To worship order alone is to reject life and deny the very means by which you came to understand that order. In this sense, God embodies the opposite of life, of will. Will wants to move, but man needs things that are static throughout time to lift himself out of hell, hence the human struggle. We do not fight merely for our bodies, but for our souls, for our way of life, for our wives, our husbands, our children, for our future. For decades, our nation has endured because of our spirit. Now the spirit needs to be protected at all costs. So long as we have in our hearts, wave our flag, we have within us the strength to rebuild. I believe it is collective action that moves the heavens and the earth, and it is the belief in said action that allows us to even take the steps in unison required to execute it. Understanding this, I would never tell myself or anyone we can't make a difference because we are part of that difference. God bless America. In the deconstruction of the social hierarchies that organized the rat society and propagated their species, this is my warning to the world. Or perhaps it is hope that even if we've damaged ourselves beyond repair, Mother Nature burns it down to make room for new societies or even species. Eventually, this is the primordial blight nestled so deep within the mind of man and animal alike. Should anyone read this, be it now or militia later, I plead with you, do not follow in our footsteps, for this is why God decreed that city building was inherently evil in all its forms. The human mind is not wired to live without objects to move toward through the mechanism of emotions. In my time observing children as a behavior technician, I've come to a realization. Children develop complexes to orient themselves and navigate the social realm toward reinforcers or objects of desire. In this sense, humans are naturally pathological, underscoring the importance of having functional social structures. The moral framework serves as a series of reinforcers through the mechanism of validation to shape human behavior. All this was allowed because humans believe themselves to be separate from animals. But make no mistake, any animal, once they reach a certain population threshold, would experience this. I believe that the occult is correct in the sense that you lose a part of yourself when you sleep with someone. I would argue that the self is primarily an assertion of boundaries between things you believe to be within your territory or things in your possession, maybe even simply an act of aggression in its most fundamental form. The Hindus teach that the chakra responsible for sexual drive seeks to conjoin and erode the boundary between a person and another spiritually and literally, physically. The implication here is that each time you are intimate with someone, you erode the boundary between yourself and them. You lose part of your territory, or that which is within your possession. I believe this puts the individual in a state of distress. A more relatable example is when you gorge yourself on food only to feel disgusted with yourself. This is because you have violated yourself and given up a part of your territory. In a sense, your impulses. You have become like an animal, and further from what we would call God. God, in this sense, is the culmination of all the behaviors and inclinations that are good for humankind. They are good for humanity because they organize him in such a way that he may realize his dominion on earth, the will that every creature, be it conscious or not, possesses. Man has declawed himself with the globalization of society, which led to moral relativism. The external frameworks and the foundation for his ego gaslight him into oblivion with the birth of moral relativism. In this sense, he is a child before a narcissistic parent that will not reciprocate his love no matter how much he please in. He is turned away from the Father and to his adversary Satan the devil. At least that's how I would imagine St. Augustine would put it. And man has declawed himself because man works best when he asked himself what is good for us, as opposed to what is good for me, because he is put simply a social creature. His survival hinges on his social frameworks and structures more than any other animal on the planet. Thus I must lament that the human spirit, in its desire to usurp the throne of God and realize its own agency, has become trapped by its own vices and reaped the seeds of its own destruction. God, the divine, the masculine, represents all static things. The devil, the feminine, represents dynamism and movement. Time, which measures movement, is the only way we can realize what is static. A lack gives rise to movement. This is seen in the universe itself. If you take water out of a cup, the rest of the water fills the void, a nothingness. This void gives rise to movement and is the only way we can realize something is there. The static, the masculine, is realized through the feminine. To worship order alone is to reject life and deny the very means by which you came to understand that order. In this sense, God embodies the opposite of life, of will. Will wants to move, but man needs things that are static throughout time to lift himself out of hell, hence the human struggle. We do not fight merely for our bodies, but for our souls, for our way of life, for our wives, our husbands, our children, for our future. For decades, our nation has endured because of our spirit. Now the spirit needs to be protected at all costs. So long as we have in our hearts, wave our flag, we have within us the strength to rebuild. I believe it is collective action that moves the heavens and the earth, and it is the belief in said action that allows us to even take the steps in unison required to execute it. Understanding this, I would never tell myself or anyone we can't make a difference because we are part of that difference. God bless America,